And if you have gotten here on time, then we should get going on time. So thank you so much. In case you are not familiar with me, I'm Marcella Marlowe. I am the city manager for the city of San Marino. Very happy to be here. These are our town hall meetings that we do once a month on the first Monday of the month on some topic that we think will be of interest to the community. So today's, of course, as you can see from your screen, is the Historic Preservation and the Mills Act. And our Community Development Director, Aldo Cervantes, will be leading us through that presentation. Afterwards, he'll be available for questions. And of course, if there's another topic that you'd like to hear at one of these town hall meetings, please don't hesitate to reach out to us and let us know what you'd like to hear about. So let's go ahead and get right into it. And Director Cervantes, I am happy to turn it over to you. Take it away.
Thank you, Dr. Marlowe, and appreciate the introductions. Saves me a little bit of time on that. But again, my name is Aldo Cervantes, Community Development Director. I've been here for about going on 17 years, a little over 17 years with this city. And so tonight's topic, of course, is Historic Preservation and the Mills Act. This is mostly a summarization of really how to get a specific property, district, object, structure designated as a landmark and what really comes next as far as incentives are concerned. So a couple of years ago, the city launched a program that looked towards establishing a citywide historic survey. The intention of the survey was to really capture as many properties in the city that were potentially eligible for designation or eligible as historic resources. Part of the survey included finding those potentially eligible homes. It did find districts as well as other structures, maybe some monuments out there that are scattered throughout the city. Also part of the citywide survey was the completion of the context statement, which is mainly a sort of a high level detailed background of the city of San Marino. It really gives the historic citywide survey some sort of teeth per se in establishing the list, various lists that we have now. And on the screen, you'll see a cover of our citywide historic context statement, as well as the recon map that established the various individually recognized properties. I know it's a little small. At the end of the town hall, I'll give my contact information. If you want to know a little bit more about this information or what you see on the screen, you can certainly send me an email. But the map established districts, individual recognized properties, those that are already designated as historic resources, as well as various other structures that are scattered throughout around the city. And so certainly utilizing the citywide historic survey as a resource, the designation process sort of lends itself to that, in fact. And back in 2018, when the city council adopted the historic preservation ordinance, it sort of kicked off this global process for really bringing together a historic preservation type program. Historic designation was established, at least the process was established when the ordinance was adopted. And some of the requirements or prerequisites for prior to applying for designation include submitting to the city staff, and more specifically my department, a complete historic assessment. These are typically done by qualified historic consultants. Under the state's website, there's a location or a part of the website called CRIS. It's an acronym that I can't spell out at the moment, but the CRIS website allows for any individual to find qualified historic consultants to do some of this very work. Of course, what I just mentioned as far as part of the requirements for designation include a plus of being listed on the citywide survey. Another plus, although not a requirement, a Department of Parks and Recreation form, or what is known as a DPR form. It's a very high level, sort of 1,000-foot distance summarization of the property that identifies statistical information about the site, the address, of course, who was the architect, who was the builder, when it was built, anything related to the architect in terms of master architect, as well as a summarization of the property. It doesn't get to the level of detail as a complete historic assessment, but it's a very good start if you have a document like a DPR form that identifies the property as eligible. And then, of course, last but not least would be any form of archived plans or drawings, more specifically, original sets would be very helpful in sort of packaging together for the city to consider a historic designation application. And on the right side of your screen, you'll see the criteria that's required for designating a property historic. You only have to meet one of them to be considered potentially eligible as a historic resource or district or object. And what I keep mentioning object, that could be, for example, a monument like the Stillman Monument that's on Mont Robles in that cul-de-sac-like street. There's also a siren that's located in an alleyway. I believe it's near Chelsea and Huntington Drive. So this is what I refer to as objects. Of course, landscaping can very well be considered historic as well. But for the purposes of this town hall meeting, I want to talk about your individually recognized properties and how to go through the process of designation. So once you really gather all the important information, there's a complete historic assessment. Again, it's a plus if you're on the citywide historic survey list, if you have a DPR form already established, and we have those in-house as well, if you're interested in finding out if you have a DPR report on your property and plans. Once you sort of package that up, you submit that to the city for the processing. And the way that it works is we present your project to the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission has the first crack at looking at your application as far as designation is concerned. And they have the authority of approving your designation request, along with recommending to the City Council a recommendation as towards which direction to go with on the property. And then lastly, the final step is the City Council's decision as to whether to consider the recommendation of the Planning Commission to designate your property as a historic resource. All this is done via resolutions, which is a very technical process that we have in the city. And so once you are officially designated as a historic landmark, there are a variety of incentives that you can qualify for. The first one being state historic building codes. And once you're designated as a historic landmark, now mind you, this could be local designation, this could be state, California state designation, or even national. It really doesn't matter. Once you're on any of those lists, you qualify for these incentives. And so state historic building codes allow for any individual owning a historic landmark to utilize exemptions in the building code to use what is known as archival materials, which is the ability of using materials, finishes, window treatments, all sorts of different types of techniques to maintain a certain level of historic character to the home. Whereas, just as a comparison, if you were to construct a new house today, California Building Code will require certain measures and methods for construction in order to comply with building codes, electrical codes, energy codes, and so you name it, there's a variety of different things. But in constructing a new house, obviously that house is going to look very modernized. Now, the intention of the waiver through the State Historic Building Code is to allow that individual with a historic landmark to utilize some of those construction techniques, those old construction materials to maintain the purity of the historic property. Additionally, there are fee waivers for construction built into the 2018 Historic Building Code, or not building code, but the ordinance, zoning code, are waivers. And what those mean are, if you qualify as a historic landmark and you're looking to modernize or revitalize a house in some way, you can apply for waivers for fees that are due. Typically, when a project is submitted for permits, there are certain fees that are required as a cost recovery type method. But fees are required in order to go through a sort of what we call a plan check process. for a historic landmark, those fees can be waived. Now, for the topic of tonight, briefly, we'll go over the Mills Act contract because that is the most popular incentive program that most property owners with historic landmarks utilize, and I'll explain why it's so popular. So the Mills Act program is essentially it's a contract that you form with your local government. In this case, you'll form it with the city of San Marino. The qualifier, of course, is being listed as a local, state, or national historic landmark. That's the #1 qualifier. If you're on any list, then you can certainly qualify for the Mills Act. And so the contract is required to be approved by the city council. It's essentially a 10-year contract with the city, and I'll explain why 10 years is important. There's a relief on property taxes. So this is the #1 incentive for Mills Act for a historic landmark is the cost savings associated with this level of contract. As I mentioned, there's a 10-year work plan that's required, and that's really with the intention of looking at within each year of the 10-year program, how you choose to revitalize, rehabilitate, restore your property. And so the 10-year contract that must be reviewed and approved by the city council, you must demonstrate to the city council that every year in that 10-year contract that you will do a certain level of work to the house. Now, the intention of the savings under the property tax is for the property owner to utilize those savings and put those savings back into the house to revitalize or maintain a historic landmark. And so that is the whole intention of providing the savings is to provide the funding necessary to upkeep a historic landmark. And I will say that it's very, very expensive to upkeep a historic landmark because you can't just find a lot of the materials and the labor needed to restore a historic landmark as you see in the modern construction. And so most importantly, the work plan must adhere to the state's Secretary of Interior standards. The whole idea of being a historic landmark is that we've recognized the historic value of the home. In most cases, it's an architectural value that's associated with this property. And so when it comes to the state's standards, they want to make sure that any kind of improvements are within certain parameters as to ensure the upkeep and integrity of that historic landmark is very important. Going outside of the state Secretary of Interior standards can result in a breach of the contract for Mills Act, and you revert right back to the old property tax formula that was issued prior to the contract. And so when you start thinking about the Mills Act for a historic landmark and knowing that it's a 10-year contract with a commitment of each year a certain amount of work to be done with a property, is very important that you do a lot of outreach with your neighbors because every year in a 10-year period, you're likely to be under construction, whether you're replacing the windows, you're replacing siding if that's the case, you're replacing the roof, or there's some much larger significant modifications that you're doing to the property. So it's always nice to let your neighbors know because in the next 10 years on the contract, you're essentially going to be doing construction for 10 years. And so here's the formula. I won't go through any of it because it's very complex, but this is the formula that LA County Register uses or Assessor's Office uses to calculate the modified property tax. Now, the property tax has to be understood as a savings to the property owner, again, with the onus of the owner to modify the house every year in the 10-year contract. The city will look at this, of course, as a revenue loss because they're losing property taxes. And so that being said, I do want the audience to recognize that although there's a revenue loss from the city, but a savings on the applicant, I think the global, the idea here that we want to set here, or the message that we want to send here is that we want to encourage revitalization of historic properties. Given that of a revenue loss, I think it's more important that over time, the city will see an increase in property value for that property just by mere fact of entering into the Mills Act contract. It may not be immediate, but certainly in the near future, you'll start to see that really that cost being recovered from the city. So there's a loss in revenue from the city, but we gain that sort of over time, and the value, property values increasing for that property. And more so, we get to revitalize a historic landmark, which I think is probably the most important goal here that we're trying to set. And so part of the Mills Act contract is that the LA County will assess the property not immediately. The council must approve the resolution to enter into this contract, and that then triggers a property owner to go to the county with the resolution approved by the city council to reassess the property under the Mills Act. So the city won't really see the losses until it's really officially done. And so keep that in mind when you're looking at entering into a contract. Oops. And so that basically, I know I went through a whole lot of details now, but the idea here was to show to the audience kind of the steps, what are the required resources of you to go down a process of historic designation. We are really what prompted this town hall meeting was processing an application currently for designation. And so we had to really learn along the way. And so it prompted me to say, well, you know what, since we're learning along the way, it's probably best to have a town hall meeting to really discuss how the process really works. That way everyone can sort of understand how it works and what's needed for this process. And so again, I went through this fairly quickly, but here's my contact information in case anyone is interested in getting more detail about the Mills Act, about historic preservation. We do have a designated application for the Mills Act contract. We do have now a process in line for going down this path. And so if you have any questions about the designation process, what kind of materials we have already in-house that we can certainly provide you, let me know. So send me an email and I can certainly provide you that information. So at this point, I open up for questions, and so the floor is now open. And really the best way to share your comments, you can either use a chat that's built into the Zoom platform, or you can use a raise hand feature that's under the participant screen. Just, you know, there's a link that you can click under your name that allows for you to raise your hand. You can use that feature, or you can just really shout out your question, and I'll do my best to find you on the screen and answer your question. I don't see any raised hands. Really, any questions, whether it relates to this topic, how it affects our decision makers in terms of looking at an application through design review or planning commission. Certainly, anything related to historic preservation, now's the time to ask the question. Okay, no questions.
All right, well, thank you, sir. As always, you know far more than any one person should. Thank you for sharing all of that information with everybody. If anybody does have follow-up questions but was too shy to ask them here in this setting, don't hesitate to reach out to Director Cervantes. He's always happy to talk about all of this stuff with anybody who has interest. So thank you so much. If you are so interested, we are finishing quite early tonight at 6:20. There is a Public Safety Commission meeting though tonight at 7 o'clock. That is also on Zoom, and access information is available on our website if you'd like to maybe grab a quick bite to eat and come back and rejoin Public Safety Commission and see what they've got going on their agenda tonight. Otherwise, we thank you so much for attending and for your interest in the city and in the topic. Wish you all the best evening, and thank you so much. We'll see you again next time. Take care.